So we've established that it's going to be harder to perform consistently because the way Street Fighter 6 is, there's over 7,000 entrants at EVO. The spotlight is hot on you. You're not playing from the comfort of your office at home. It's going to be hard enough to get far. I want to talk about the characters that kind of lend themselves to this, that we think are going to be the best performers at EVO. Kind of which characters do we suppose are going to be more prevalent in top 8, if that's a huge factor. If there's maybe a character that just because of their nature, even a really high level player is not going to be able to take very far because it's asking too much and it's too big of a mountain. But let's get into it here, Nick. Which characters do you think are going to perform the best at EVO and why, off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I think Guile, Ken, and Luke are all going to perform quite well. First of all, I think they are all top 5 characters. They're quite generally accepted as top 5 characters. And I think they all have a very solid game plan, which isn't necessarily that they get to have this relaxation time, because we already kind of talked about that not being much of a thing. Mm-hmm. But you're focusing on generally the same kind of things with them. And I think that is going to help in the long run when you're doing all this kind of stuff, because, I mean, Guile, for example, right? It's honestly mentally taxing to play that character, especially in a game with no chip damage, because you're just sitting forever and just chucking booms and doing the whole thing, and if they get in on you, that's going to be a huge mental blow. But
I would argue that Guile is still doing chip damage in this game, even if it's not coming off your life, but you play that game to do chip in this game in no insignificant way.
I mean, okay, yeah, that is a fair statement, because you are chipping at their drive gauge, and if you do chip that down, then obviously you are doing actual chip at that point. So yeah, there's a longer way to get to that chip damage, is probably a better way of putting it.
Okay.
But yeah, and even though that is like, okay, so this is something that I have to keep doing, and I might get shot with like, oh, they did a jump in at exactly the perfect time, like on a hard read, and now that screwed me over. It's gonna be a hard hit mentally, but it's still gonna be more relaxing than playing a character where you have to look at like 15 situations at once. Like there's this meme people always post with different fighting games where one character has a go-to anti-air and the other one has to make like 15 decisions, right? So one is like doing physics in their head and the other one is just like, oh, press funny button. Yeah. And it's a little bit like that in a sense. So that, coupled with them being strong characters, I think makes them perfect candidates to go far in this type of tournament, where characters like Chun-Li or DJ, who are kind of juggling a bunch of different stuff while they're doing it, while still being very strong characters, are going to have a harder time in this type of, play 12 to 14 sets in one day type of event.
I gotta ask then, you didn't say Cammy. I was gonna say you didn't say Cammy or Jury. I suppose I can see the argument that while Jury is very effective in that footsie's horizontal space, the rushdown space, she's got a few more hoops to jump through with storing up charges and stuff. But Cammy, you didn't say Cammy. Why not?
I do think Cammy has a fairly straightforward game plan as well. I think she falls into that category, but she's actually not in my top 5, which Ken, Luke, and Guile are, and I think that's kind of why I didn't really mention her. But I think she's like 6th, so I'm not saying she's not great. I think she's really good. So
she's one of the first that comes to my mind, and not to say that Ken and Luke aren't, because I think they have a lot going for them, and it's not particularly difficult. It's not especially difficult for them to do the stuff that they want to do. But Cammy has always been that. Maybe she's not quite as much that as she was in SF4 or SF5, and I'm just kind of remembering. But I do think she's one of those up there that I wouldn't be surprised to see a Cammy player make it in the top 8 based on what the character is.
No, absolutely. I think Cammy is a character that is well suited for this type of bracket as well. I just don't have her quite as high on my internal character ranking as I do with Guile, Ken, and Luke.
Do you have any characters that you think are going to be just absolutely insanely difficult to perform with long term? Not even, I mean, probably lower tiers, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Like, I'm thinking of JP, and as a JP player, he's a very strong character. You can argue he's top 5. I think he's top 8, something like that. But he's a character that, one, frustrates other people and fatigues other people like crazy. But he's also one that, as a JP player, you're constantly worried about people pressing in, getting past your stuff, drive rushing through, or jumping in at a good time, and just making your life hell. And with his lack of kind of movement, in at least in his walk speed and such, it can be hard. It's scary as a zoner to get zoned or to get broken through. So I think about JP, and it can be very taxing because I feel the need to be ready at every advance to stop you, and that's a lot to be juggling. But what are your thoughts on JP first of all? And I don't think he's the worst, by the way, but he's one I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, I think JP is going to be difficult. That's just the nature of the beast when playing a zoner. I spent most of my time in Granblue Fantasy Versus playing Matera, who is a zoner character with some movement options, some not so good. And I think JP kind of falls almost into the exact same category because he has these like teleport shenanigans. Mm-hmm. His jump is actually pretty good, but his walk speed leaves something to be desired. And his normals are definitely not bad, but like when you're up close, JP isn't really that scary, and getting up close isn't it depends on your character. If you're Zangief, it's actually really hard to get up close with JP, but for a lot of characters, it's not that hard. So because you're going to Evo, so let's use you specifically as an example. Yeah. So if you play in a pool and you have to play 3 camis in a row, that's going to be really annoying for you.
Yes.
And that's going to tax you out a lot worse than it would for someone else. Like if a Chem has to play against Cammy, for example, sure, she's annoying, but she's not like invalidating your game plan to a certain extent. I don't think Cammy just runs over JP for free, but I think she has an easier in than a lot of other characters would do, which makes it more frustrating for the JP player.
Absolutely.
So I think we also kind of saw this results-wise for CEO, because I remember we did an episode back then as well where we talked about how I think it was the top 96. JP was the most represented character,
popular.
But then when we got then when we got down to top 24, there was like none left.
There were none. No, none made it past 24th. So that was interesting too. Is he can hold his own for a while, but then people are gonna crack and fall apart. I
think worse than JP though. I just need to mention this. Worse than JP is Dalsim, because Dalsim he's always been like that, and I think people kind of got accustomed to Street Fighter V Dalsim, where he had some really gnarly mix-ups and some massive damage, and he's not bad in this game, but he doesn't have those types of, for lack of a better word, those types of cheats, right? He's a much more straightforward character who really needs to just stay solid in the game plan here. I mean, I don't want to say he wasn't doing that in Street Fighter V, but it was a different type of game.
Too. It takes time for the Dalsim players to figure out how to really play Dalsim at the level of getting to top 8 at Evo. So, I mean, someone like FChamp has done it before, and maybe is going to do it again this time. Who knows? Mr. Crimson, there's a plenty of promising Dalsim players out there, but I would say give those guys a year or two, and then they're more likely to hit a top 8 at Evo. It's just because of the nature of the character. And on the flip side of that, I gotta ask about Rasheed. He's gonna be there. He's out. He's been out for a little while. They fixed the really crazy bug about him where his super was going on forever. And people are starting to get some experience with him. He's got some zany stuff. He's playing his own game in terms of he can go to the air and then he can double jump, and your anti-airs are not. Your anti-airs against like Ken are not the same thing when you're playing against Rasheed because of the way he can maneuver in the air and things along those lines. So the onus is on, I would say, the person playing against Rasheed to figure out how to beat Rasheed, and you've only got about 10 days since release before Evo kicks off. So I wanted to ask what your thoughts on how do you think Rasheed's going to perform this weekend?
I think Rasheed is going to do well this weekend, but I also think one thing that Rasheed is going to suffer from is the fact that he's releasing so close to Evo means a lot of people aren't going to be willing to actually commit to the character.
Yep.
I think a perfect example we have is Big Bird, who's been winning almost everything he entered with Marissa, and he's been playing Rasheed a ton. He used to play Rasheed in Street Fighter V. Rasheed is his guy. Is he actually going to bring Rasheed out at Evo, though? When he has a Marissa he's that good with? I don't know. I mean, we'll find out. But I think that's going to be the case for a lot of top players, is like, okay, but am I going to because we already mentioned, the money, the travel time, everything you're investing in going to Evo. Are you going to gamble that on a character who's been out this short of a time?
Right. It's got to be. It's got to be a really good matchup that you already understand with the character, maybe like that kind of a scenario. But I don't think we're going to see. I hope we don't see people that are just matter of fact maining Rasheed, getting him to top 8 10 days after he came out. I mean, that's its own conversation, but that's maybe a little bit of a bad look. As far as the competitive side of this game goes, you might make your DLC characters especially strong to sell more money or to make more money, sell more units and all that kind of stuff, and fair enough. But I'm hoping that we don't see like one Rasheed top 8, fine, fair enough. More than that, and it's like, I don't want to see that as a competitive player.
Sure. And I think that's kind of the worry that's been circling around. You know, there have been so many memes about Rasheed right when he came out.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, he had that bug. Of course, that was like broken. They patched it out. It's not relevant anymore. But there was a bunch of other stuff that was posted that was absolutely crazy, right? And that's still in the game. Rasheed does have absolutely crazy options, but I think even with this short time we've had with him, it's just been a week right now. People have already started to figure out that, like, oh, okay, so this character has a lot of options, but they don't always lead to gigantic reward, whereas other characters can get this massive reward off of their interactions, which might not be as favored for them. In a sense, I feel like Rasheed has kind of been brought in line with where we wanted him to be.
They've done a relatively good job balancing all of the different components of the game, gameplay and inside and out. And so I have no reason to expect them to not have done a good job with Rasheed outside of what happened in Street Fighter V, but they've been leveling up, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going into Evo with a big smile on my face, and hopefully that I don't get scrubbed out by a Rasheed because I didn't do my studying on him or something like that. But I feel like there's a lot of that stuff that could be out there that how are you going to know? And like I said at the beginning of this part of the discussion, I think that it's easier at this point for the Rasheed player to have some goofy stuff than for those that are playing against the Rasheed to know everything, just because of the way the character sort of works.
I absolutely agree with that, because at the end of the day, Rasheed at his core, even in Street Fighter V, but also now in Street Fighter 6, he is the type of character who forces his game plan onto you. So as a player, learning Rasheed is probably going to be a bit faster than it's going to be for the opponent to learn how to fight against Rasheed. So I think seeing Rasheed do well at Evo is absolutely a possibility. It mostly comes down to, okay, but which really good players have actually decided to commit to him this fast?
Yeah. There's a character that jumps out to me that's not particularly bad. She's also not particularly good. But Manon, I think it would be especially difficult to get Manon into the top 8. And the reason for that is because she's not one that gets to just force her will. She plays footsies first and foremost, and most characters do in this game. But she plays footsies, and she has to get an in, and then she can start leveling up. And if she gets that momentum, great, it's in her favor. But she still has to score ins. And we talked in a earlier about how this game has so much mental stack, so much pressure. And she never gets to let up from that. She's always playing that footsie game, and she's dealing with people that can drive rush from various distances away, and maybe she's dealing with a Honda that can headbutt or a Blanca that can Blanca ball at any time, Rasheed that's doing some crazy air shenanigans on her. She's just playing kind of the solid neutral game, hoping to get command grabs and find openings, but that seems like such a grueling process that I would be rather surprised to see even someone like Idom take Manon all the way into top 8 in this like tournament, in this event. It's very possible, but I think that she's going to have an especially hard time. I would say something similar for Lily, and of course Zangief is part of this conversation too, right? As a grappler who has to play footsies and stuff, but Zangief seems to be one that jumps forward a little bit more than Manon does in terms of like using drive rush and using like the rainbow kick or using a running bear grab. He's got ways of just going for it, and Manon does a little bit, but not like he does. I don't expect either of those characters to do super well, but I think Manon would be especially difficult because I guess Zangief gets to turn off his brain and go for it a little more often. And I don't mean that Zangief players are brainless. I mean, there are situations where he can just kind of like hope this works, and it might not work out for him, but at least the decision has been made, where Manon is just always focused in and like having to analyze and like just constant main on your mental mana. What do you think?
There's a lot to unpack there, actually, because I do agree that these are three characters that are likely to struggle, but for entirely different reasons. For example, you brought up Lily. I think Lily is actually a character that's very good at forcing her game plan. Like, she is a character that forces her game plan. It's just that her game plan isn't really that good compared to what many other characters do. But she's very centered around just forcing you into a 50-50. And yeah, sure, you can drive reverse on it, absolutely. But she can also chip away at your resources. So maybe you're out of drive gauge at that point, or maybe you don't even want to spend the drive gauge because it's quite easy for her to just keep chipping in at you.
Yeah.
As for Manon and Zangief, I think the key issue with Manon is just that she doesn't really gel with the system mechanics, and I think that's intentionally so. Her drive rush is the slowest and the shortest distance. But I think she has way better neutral than Zangief does, which is probably why you feel this this feeling of Zangief going kind of just do it stuff, because he kind of has to. Yeah, whereas Manon is more consistent. So I think Manon is more consistent, Zangief is more explosive, but neither of them really use the drive system that well. I would say Zangief uses it better, but neither of them are really using it that well.
I would be surprised to see any of those characters crack top 8. I would be somewhat surprised to see a JP make it too, not because he doesn't have the tools, but because putting that amount of pressure for someone to perform that consistently with this character for that long is a lot. What do you think? Would you be surprised to see a JP in top 8?
Oh man, I feel like I have to look at all the bracket paths for all the top players.
Well,
but obviously we don't have time for that. I think just because of how popular he is at the high level, I would not be surprised to see JP in top 8.
Fair enough. We got Nemo playing him. We got now that I'm on the spot, I can't remember his name, but the guy that did amazingly well at Red Bull Kumite.
Oh yeah. Kakeru. You also have Sonic Fox. There's a bunch of people.
I do think that, there's going to be a Ken, or at least a Ken, a Luke, Cammy, Jury, I think are some really top tier candidates. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see someone make it work with DJ. You're right that he's juggling more pins to think about himself, but he's got those options where he can get the job done from pretty much any distance away, and he hits so hard. I wouldn't put Marissa there except for the way that Big Bird's been going crazy with her. So I think Big Bird top 8 is a good prediction. And if Mena's playing Blanca, we might see a Blanca jump into top 8 too. So anything could happen, but I do think that there are certain characters that, based on what we're going into, this huge tournament with so many matches and such a fatigue, plus the newness of Rasheed, I think it's an interesting kind of like, well, what's going to happen here? But we'd love to hear in the comments who you guys think are going to show up in the later parts of this tournament, which characters have the most likeliness to win Evo or to do really well, and why. But after we see some awesome competition, we're also almost certainly going to see some big reveals. Hey, thanks for checking out that clip from Talkin' Block. If you'd like to hear what those big announcements very well might be, you can do so in this clip right here. And if you want to hear our entire pre-Evo 2023 discussion, you can do so right here.